Dear Bethesda, and CD Projekt Red, and Ubisoft, and EA, From Software, blah blah blah, the list goes on. You know what? This is an open letter to everybody ever who makes fantasy RPG games with swords and sorcery and all that bullshit. This is for you. I'm writing to y'all today on behalf of Edwin Abramson, who's not convinced that your depiction of bows and arrows is entirely accurate. And you know what? I see his point. You guys treat arrows in your games like they're merely inconvenient splinters as opposed to lethal projectiles that used to make or break entire battles by embedding themselves into people's flesh and bone in an age without sterilization and dentists that would try to channel eldritch cosmic deities into your mouth. But in all seriousness, Edwina brings up a really good point, and something I hadn't thought of until now. Are arrows really less harmful than swords? Should fantasy games be upping their game when it comes to medieval style combat? In order to answer this question, we're gonna have to do something a little bit different today. We're gonna have to put on our historian hats. Never fear though, there will still be some science! In this day and age of firearms, swords and arrows have been relegated to Renaissance fair tchotchkes and tools for backwoods hunters, but for thousands of years, these were the primary weapons of war and were tools engineers and craftsmen spent their entire lives perfecting and trying to counter. Weapons both dictated and were dictated by technology, with counters to different combat technologies building on each other for generations. Eventually, arrows gave way to black powder guns, which were equally, if not more effective, required less extensive training to be fatal, didn't require you to be an Olympian weightlifter to draw the string, and as an added bonus, were a lot more difficult for the enemy to reuse against you. You could pick an arrow up off the ground in the heat of battle and fire it back, but doing so with a tiny as fuck ball that most likely squished on impact, not quite so easy. Bullets and arrows have a lot of similarities in how they operate, both in the physical sense, but also in their roles in combat. They hit targets from a great distance, can be used to suppress and control the battlefield, and completely and totally suck to get hit with. So bullets and arrows are effectively the same thing, right? Totally wrong. While both bullets and arrows fly through the air, are affected by wind resistance and gravity, the way they impact what they come into contact with and how they do damage are totally and completely different. For one thing, bullets fired from a gun carry a lot of energy in a very tiny space. Even guns that have 22 caliber rounds that big machismo manly men scoff at would definitely not want to be shot with one. When a bullet makes contact, it dissipates its kinetic energy extremely quickly, and as it embeds itself into someone and passes through flesh and muscle, this energy spreads out into surrounding tissue due to an effect called hydrostatic shock, which makes a bullet dangerous to organs and blood vessels a long way away from the original entry wound and path the bullet takes. This is why, ultimately, there really isn't a particularly safe place to get shot with a gun. Vital organs and arteries are absolutely everywhere, and they can get shredded into ribbons by hydrostatic shock. Even the most energetic arrows from medieval times carry significantly less energy in a much larger package than even the weakest firearms sold on the market today. So, what's so dangerous about them? Whilst truth they carry less concussive impact force and hardly create hydrostatic shock on the level seen with even tame firearms, arrows are still incredibly dangerous and, under some circumstances, way worse to get shot with. For one, it doesn't take that much energy at all to pierce flesh and organs. Our bodies are notoriously soft and pliable, and the yield strength is incredibly low. Arrows are easily able to pierce skin and muscle, and as the arrowhead passes through, it slices and tears anything in its path. A wide cutting surface means that even one arrow can wreak an incredible amount of havoc on anything it comes into contact with. But what's worse, however, is the long-term prognosis. You see, a bullet, as we mentioned before, is very small. If you happen to survive a gunshot wound, particularly in the early days of firearms, your body could actually heal around the bullet. You could live your entire life with bullets lodged in you without it affecting you too much. An arrow, by contrast, is way too large, and if it isn't removed, guarantees life-threatening infection. The problem is, most arrowheads were designed so that they couldn't be easily pulled out. It either has to be pushed entirely through your body and pulled out the other end, or if it hit bone, it needs to be surgically removed. In an age without anesthetic and sterilization, an arrow wound was almost certainly a death sentence. So why do fantasy game designers treat arrows like they're inferior to swords, axes, and maces when they could be just as, if not more, fatal? Well, it could be because of laziness or game design, or it could be due to something we haven't even touched on yet: armor. You see, earlier I said the weapons dictated and were dictated by wartime technology, and nowhere was this more evident than in armor. Armor was designed to protect ground troops from the tools of death their enemies employed, giving them a slight yet precious advantage on the battlefield. Over the years, there have been thousands of different techniques, styles, and shapes, all of which were designed to counter very specific tactics and weapons. The pinnacle, and perhaps the trademark of both fantasy and medieval history, being full plate armor. A warrior clad in hardened steel from head to toe was like a living, breathing tank on the battlefield. Full steel plate armor was so effective, in fact, that knights frequently completely abandoned shields in favor of simply brandishing one sword or even dual wielding. After all, why would you weigh yourself down with a shield when you're essentially already wearing one all over your body? Contrary to popular belief, full plate armor wasn't all that heavy. At its thickest, it was about 3 millimeters and weighed about twice as much as American football gear. Warriors clad in this were relatively fast and agile and could withstand infinitely more punishment than lesser armored foes. But if full plate was so effective, why did people still use arrows and swords at all? Well, for a few reasons. For one, properly made full plate was expensive and entire armies were rarely equipped with it. But for another, while full plate did offer incredible protection, it didn't render the wearer invincible, not by a long shot. And if you weren't careful, you were definitely gonna end up dead. Funnily, in almost every game that has a pseudo-medieval or Renaissance setting, hacking and slashing is the norm. But the truth is, hacking and slashing at steel armor was all but a useless exercise to tire your arms out. Steel cannot possibly be hacked through with a sword by anybody other than a fucking robot with super strength, but it doesn't mean that swords were useless. In fact, entire fencing schools and disciplines existed to teach men how to fight against heavily armored opponents, and it looked almost nothing like what we see in movies and video games. While functionally immune to weapon edges, wearers of full plate were still highly susceptible to high blunt force trauma, so knights in combat could use a technique called Mordschlag, literally murder strike, where they would grab their swords by the blade and use the pommel as a hammer. Knights would then wrench their swords into weak points in the neck or shoulders, gripping the blade to get better leverage. Arrows could find these weak points as well and gain entry into the eye slits of the armor, which were particularly vulnerable, but that was pretty uncommon. No, arrows on the battlefield were about harassment and control. Sure, arrows may not embed themselves in your flesh, but getting pelted with 100 of them over the course of an hour doesn't exactly make you feel good about yourself. Steel plate was designed to deflect arrows in the same way modern tanks are designed to deflect bullets in artillery shells. However, at the end of the day, this steel was incredibly thin, and an English warbow could fire a 1,000 grain arrow weighing 64 grams at a frighteningly fast 55 meters per second. Traveling this quickly, an arrow with a bodkin point, if it lands at the perfect angle, is strong enough to wedge itself through even steel plate armor, and any lesser armors might as well have been tissue paper. So where does this leave us? Arrows are fatal, swords are fatal, but neither of them appear in games as they were used in real life. Why is that? Well, for fun factor, of course, but there's more to it than that. The stories we like to tell ourselves and participate in, these stories of lone, strong heroes who can single-handedly shape the history of nations, has almost nothing to do with what war and combat was really like in medieval and Renaissance times. War and fighting wasn't just one person against 5 or even 20, or hacking and slashing their way through the countryside. They were bloody, brutal, lengthy brawls, epic and ruthless clashes of tens of thousands of men who were trained to coldly aim for the weakest part of the faceless, nameless, identityless enemy soldier in front of them before moving on to the next, or invariably dying in the process. There was little chivalry and art in combat, but there was skill. What's more, even a slight injury, even were it not enough to kill you or even knock you out of the battle entirely, was nearly always a death sentence in the long run. There was no guard duty after an arrow in the knee. There's only pain, disease, amputation, and invariably death, homelessness if you're lucky. At the end of the day, the truth about why arrows are weaker than swords is far more complicated than any current game can hope to cover in its entirety. Armor types, thickness, speeds, and force are all just too much. There are too many variables. And for the most part, one man with one bow is going to be completely fucked against one woman properly armored with one sword. But an army of archers? That's a force to fucking reckon with. Sincerely, Austin. P.S. Sailor Moon Crystal just ended, and season 4 hasn't been announced yet. What am I gonna do on Mondays? I mean, I guess I could watch them all again. Have you watched Sailor Moon? Yeah, I have no shame admitting that I, a thoroughly masculine man, totally enjoy the hell out of Sailor Moon. It's got cute girls, themes of love and friendship, and cats, and gay people. It's the best. And if you've not checked out the reboot yet, you totally can on Crunchyroll. Crunchyroll is the leading destination for anime, manga, and even live action shows. For only $6.95 a month, you can get all these shows and more. And hey, if you're skeptical and don't want to fork over the money, you can go to crunchyroll.com/shoddy for a free 30-day trial. That's a whole flippin' month of HD anime. Crunchyroll gives a portion of the revenue back to the people who make the shows that you love, so you can peruse without guilt, knowing that you're giving back to the artists that make things that you love possible. And if you like Sailor Moon, and you've already watched it, you should check out Madoka Magica if you haven't yet. It's different and a little, well, I won't spoil it. So head on over to crunchyroll.com/shoddy and start your 30-day free trial now. Don't forget the /shoddy, otherwise you only get a 14-day free trial. And, know that they want you to know that you came from us. Oh, and I'm actually gonna be out of town on the 4th of July, so I won't be streaming, but I will be next week. A lot of you voted in my poll last week, and it looks like I'm gonna be streaming Overwatch. Goody! Thank you everyone for watching my video about swords and arrows and stuff. This one was this was one of the more complicated things I read about. I know you can look at this and you're like, okay, well, Austin only really had like one or two like little formulas in it, but the truth of the matter is that the history and the complexity of the technology is so diverse. I read about this for 2 weeks actually, because when I got the question a couple videos ago, I really liked the question and I was excited to research it, but this topic is huge. And if anybody is a medieval historian enthusiast, they're gonna be having an opinion about what I said about arrows piercing steel. I know that. There are a lot of strong opinions, and one of the problems is that we cannot test old school armor and weapons because everything we make them now is in modern ways. Like even the steel, the way we mine it is more advanced than back then. So it's actually really hard to get good data on that. But if you want to know a little bit more about how bows and arrows were used in medieval combat, you should head over to Wikipedia and just Google the Battle of Agincourt and just skim it. It's a battle during the 100 Years' War where the French were battling the English, and the English had like 7,000 bowmen and were vastly outnumbered and actually managed to win against heavily armored French people. It's a very interesting thing to take a look at. It was well documented, so there's lots of information on that. Anyway, I'm gonna go now. Enjoy your 4th of July if you're American. If you aren't, still enjoy it. I don't want you to have a bad 4th of July. Anyway, bye.